Welcome everybody to this event. So glad you could join us here. We're going to begin our event with some words of welcome from Laura Wasner from Languages and Cultural Training, and she will remind us about the International Education Week that our event is part of. So welcome everybody.
Thank you, Gail, and thank you, guests, for joining us this evening for our CLASA event during International Education Week. We join you from the University of Detroit-Mercy in Detroit, Michigan, the traditional lands and territory of the Anishinaabe people, also known as the Three Fires of the Confederacy, consisting of the Ojibwe, the Ottawa, and the Potawatomi. Since the beginning of time, this land has served as an important and sacred place for these and many other tribes throughout this region. It is the responsibility of each of us to discuss and educate about the traditional people of this land and the hardships they have faced and continue to face. We offer this land acknowledgement during International Education Week, as International Education Week happens to fall annually the week before the Thanksgiving holiday in the US. To this end, we reflect on ways in which we can transform awareness into advocacy and act for meaningful change. A few words about International Education Week. This is an opportunity to celebrate the benefits of international education and exchange worldwide. This joint initiative of the U.S. Department of Education and the U.S. Department of State is an opportunity to highlight the value of global and cultural competencies and promote programs that help U.S. students and teachers develop global skills for success in the 21st century. Many of our most pressing challenges are inherently global in scope and impact, and can only be addressed by nations and individuals working together. From tackling pandemics and the climate crisis to reducing economic disparities and building prosperity, to countering threats to democracy and maintaining peace, resolving these global challenges requires partnership and collaboration across borders. It is imperative that we continue to cooperate with our allies, invest in our relationships, and broaden our engagement worldwide. It is in the spirit of mutual understanding and diplomacy that we host events during International Education Week and throughout the year. CLASA stands as a pillar amongst programs at the university, creating awareness, advocacy, and action throughout the year. I now introduce Dr. Gail Presby, who will acknowledge this event's co-sponsors and introduce our guest speaker, Danny Marrero. Thank you, Gail.
Okay, thank you so much, Laura, and thank you all for joining us. So this event is sponsored by the Carney Latin American Solidarity Archive. We house the papers of Father James Guadalupe Carney, a Jesuit who had been a student at our university and then became a missionary in Honduras, where he was devoted to the rights of the landless people in Honduras, and he helped to organize them for their land rights. He was a liberation theologian. It's in the spirit of his dedication to justice issues and in the spirit of solidarity that we put on these events focusing on peace and justice issues in Latin America and around the world. So thank you so much for joining us, and we're very happy to have the philosophy department as our co-sponsor this evening, and also language and cultural training and the International Services Office, and also Great Lakes Bioneers Detroit, with their interest in environment and addressing issues of environmental racism. So thank you to everybody who's come and all of our co-sponsors. Now I want to tell you about our evening speaker. I'm very happy to introduce Professor Danny Marrero. I know you're going to really enjoy his presentation. He's currently an assistant professor in the philosophy department at Salem State University. He has been interested in issues of law and philosophy for many years. He earned 2 bachelor degrees, one in philosophy and one in law, in Bogota, Colombia. And then he got his master's and PhD in philosophy at University of Arkansas. His areas of interest are philosophy of law, epistemology, and Latin American philosophy. He's taught in many universities and undergraduate and graduate programs in both North and South America. And he's been teaching beyond the classroom. He served as specialized trainer for criminal investigators, prosecutors, and judges with the Colombian Office of the Attorney General and the Office of Overseas Prosecutorial Development, Assistance, and Training of the U.S. Department of Justice. So he has a lot of experience. He has many publications as well. And today he's going to tell us about rights attributions to rivers, a Latin American response to violence and injustice against ethnic communities and future generations. So please join me in welcoming Professor Danny Marrero. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Gail, and thank you, everybody who came to this webinar and all the people that made this possible at the University of Detroit. I have to start saying that I learned English when I was old, so my tongue still rebels, and sometimes I mispronounce. So I will put a lot of things in the screen so that you can follow what I say if I say it wrong, okay? So, as you already know, my presentation, the title of my presentation is Right Attributions to Rivers, a Latin American response to the violence and injustice against ethnic communities and future generations. And I want to start calling your attention to the fact that environmental jurisprudence is going through a fascinating moment because rivers are being conceived as right holders in places such as New Zealand, India, Colombia, Bangladesh, the Orange County in Florida, and the province of Quebec. Just to give you an idea of what I am trying to say, these are some of the most important rulings in this area. So in New Zealand, the Wanganui River Settlement Act of 2017 declared that the Wanganui River has all the rights, powers, duties, and liabilities of a legal person. In India, the High Court declared that the rivers Ganga and Jamuna, all their tributaries and streams, every natural water flowing from its flow continuously or intermittently has the same juristic legal rights of a person. Then also in Colombia, the Constitutional Court recognized that the Atrato River, its basin, and its tributaries have the rights of protection, conservation, maintenance, and restoration. And finally, also the Colombian Supreme Court recognized that the Colombia Amazonia, that is the Amazon River and all the tropical forest around it, is the right holder of protection, conservation, maintenance, and restoration. So this presentation is a work in progress in which I am trying to study the philosophical merits and contributions of Latin American jurisprudence to this movement of the rights of nature. In this presentation, I'm going to study the contributions of Latin American environmental jurisprudence to the strategy of environmental protection of rights of attributing rights to rivers. Specifically, I am going to study the arguments leading the Colombian Constitutional Court and the Supreme Court to attribute rights in Colombia to rivers. Briefly, this contribution was inspired by the idea that attributing rights to rivers protects cultural communities dependent on them. However, for Latin American jurisprudence, this is not enough, and they think that the protection of rivers is also a necessary condition for human survival in general. And that's the main claim I'm going to defend, that for Latin American jurisprudence, right attributions to rivers are not only justified by biocultural rights, but also by the rights of children's and future generations. So the Wanganui tribes in New Zealand have a saying which translates in English in the following way: the river flows from the mountains to the sea. I am the river is me. In this presentation, I will use this saying as a rhetorical device to present the arguments leading Latin American jurisprudence to attribute rights to rivers. In the first part, I will show how the non-trivial relationship between Afro-descendants, indigenous and mestizo communities, and the Atrato River led the Colombian Constitutional Court to attribute rights to rivers. In the second part, I will show how this strategy was the inspiration for the Colombian Supreme Court to confer legal rights to the Colombian Amazonia to protect present and future generations of Colombians from climate change. And I want to start talking a little bit about the context, the general context leading the Colombian Constitutional Court to attribute rights to the Atrato River. So going back to the Wanganui saying, the river flows from the mountains to the sea. In our case, the Atrato River flows from the western branch of the Colombian Andes Mountains through the northwest Colombian territory to the Gulf of Urabá in the Caribbean Ocean. This river is only 460 miles long, but its large discharge of no less than 175,000 cubic feet of water per second makes it one of the rivers with the largest water flows in Colombia. Its basin of 24,800 square miles extends from the northwest of Colombia to the south of Panama, and it's constituted by 15 tributaries and about 300 ravines. It is also one of the most diverse ecosystems in the world. It hosts about 9,000 species of plants, 200 mammals, 6 types of birds, 100 reptiles, and 120 species of amphibians. About 25% of all these animals and plants are endemic. And last but not least, this basin is also rich in gold, platinum, woods, and is considered one of the most rich and fertile lands in agriculture for agriculture in Latin America. The second part of the Wanganui saying is, I am the river is me. And originally, this expression, or the expression I in the saying, stands for the Wanganui tribes, believing that the river from which they take their name is sacred. In my interpretation, this expression is extended to our Afro-descendants, indigenous, and mestizo communities living in the geographical region through which the Atrato River flows, which is called Chocó. When the case under account was ruled, the population of this area was about 500,000 people. 87 of them are Afro-descendant, 10% indigenous communities, and 3% mestizo. 98% of this land is the collective territory of about 600 Afro-descendant communities and 120 indigenous reservations of the ethnicity Embera. The 4% of the territory left is inhabited by mestizo farmers that have immigrated to the region. The Atrato River's basin has been the ancestral home of these communities, and the river has shaped their styles of living. For instance, these communities perform practices of traditional agriculture scheduled around the river cycles and includes the farming of local foods such as corn, rice, chontaduro, plantain, cocoa, or sugarcane. Fishing is done with arrows and handmade cast nets. mining applies traditional non-industrialized methods of gold and platinum extraction. And this ontological connection with the river was confirmed by one of the exhibits introduced in the trial by the plaintiffs, in which several anthropologists claim that the river is the main factor of cultural identity in this region. From my perspective, this is the reason for which, or this existential connection is the reason for which several communities and organizations sue the Colombian government, because from the perspective, it was the omissions of the Colombian government to provide security and protect the environment. That was the cause which allowed for the increasing of industrialized illegal mining and logging in the Atrato River basin. Given that these activities include heavy-duty machinery and toxic materials like mercury, the Atrato River's environment is deteriorating really rapidly. As a consequence, the ethnic community's rights to life, the rights to live, health, water, food, a healthy environment, culture, and territory are violated because of the cultural equilibrium of the territories was broken. Without entering in the specifics, legal details of this legal procedure, I want to highlight that the protection of the ethnic communities was not granted by the lower court originally taking the case, because from its perspective, the environmental protection requested didn't merit the extreme judicial intervention requested by the plaintiffs. Fortunately, the Colombian Constitutional Court overturned this decision with a backbone argument of the ruling, which is this argument. So I will present the main argumentative movements, and you can see the movements there. For the Colombian Constitutional Court, the protection of the right to a healthy environment is especially relevant for our descendant and indigenous communities, because a healthy environment is a necessary condition to guarantee the continuity of their lifestyle and ancestral traditions. In other words, the protection of the right to a healthy environment, of the Afro-descendant communities and indigenous communities is a necessary condition to guarantee other fundamental rights, such as their collective identity and their cultural integrity. The reason for this is that the right to a healthy environment that belongs to these ethnic communities goes beyond the mere protection of biological diversity. Better yet, it is a necessary condition for them to enjoy their own territories. When environmental deterioration doesn't allow ethnic communities to satisfy the basic needs or the basic needs of their individual members, such as health and personal integrity, those individuals are forced to displace to other places where those basic needs are guaranteed, or at least they are not threatened in a direct way. If the members of these ethnic communities are forcibly displaced from their own lands, not only their lives of their individual communities are negatively affected, but also the social network keeping these communities together, that is maintaining their cultural tradition and lifestyle living, is eroded. So I want to stop here for a second, because I want you to notice that the court in that case used the wording of for displacement to refer to the moving of ethnic communities members from their ancestral territories to other places where their basic needs could be presumably satisfied. And this is remarkable for the court of a country like Colombia, with one of the highest numbers of forced displacement in the world. So to clarify, the main cause of forced displacement in Colombia has been the ongoing armed conflict that has forced more than 7 million people to move from their homes to preserve their lives. For the Constitutional Court, the right to live not only includes the mere biological existence, but also the material, cultural, and spiritual conditions allowing individuals to have a dignified life. From this follows that individuals of ethnic communities would also be fleeing for their lives when their ancestral territories, when in their ancestral territories they cannot satisfy their basic needs. Going back to the backbone of argument of this ruling, the court found that the antecedent of the first premise of this hypothetical syllogism was true. That is, the court found that the environmental deterioration in the Atrato River's basin doesn't allow the ethnic communities living in this area to satisfy their basic needs of their individual members. From the court, environmental deterioration becomes evident if we compare the unexploited forest of the Atrato River with the areas of the river where illegal mining and logging happen. So illegal mining and logging are the two pictures on the left of your screen, and the original river is the right of your screen, the picture on the right of your screen. From evidence like this, the court inferred that the river was deviated from its original path. Also, the sandbags and the artificial branches have deteriorated the river's natural flow. And given this environmental deterioration, the basic needs of the communities living around the Atrato River basin cannot be satisfied. Regarding to the right to health, which was one of the rights that wanted to be protected in this case, after studying the evidence, the court found that the levels of mercury in people living around the Atrato River was above normal. The reason for this is that the population consumed mercury-contaminated fish. Also, other of the rights protected, which is the right to food of these communities, was violated because given the illegal mining and deforestation, the farming on traditional foods was disappearing, and 15 endemic species were declared extinct, and 15 types of fish living in the river now are not apt to human consumption because of their high levels of mercury. All this affects the traditional forms of subsistence, and as a consequence, it has eroded the right of these communities to preserve their cultures. Given that the river had changed and that the river is one of the most important factors of cultural identity, these communities are changing, or better yet, disappearing. For the Colombian Constitutional Court, the Colombian state and the respective local authorities violated the rights to live, health, and healthy environment of the communities to which the planets belong. As a consequence, the court mandated several measures to protect and restore the violated rights and environment and the environment around the Atrato River basin. Also, given that the very existence of the ethnic communities at risks depend on the Atrato River, the court declared the Atrato River as a subject of special protection. Indeed, the court recognized the Atrato River, its basin, and its tributaries as an entity with the rights of protection, conservation, maintenance, and restoration. Now, is this interdependence between humans and nature the inspiration of another tribunal, the Colombian Supreme Court, to attribute rights to the Colombian Amazonia? So now I am going to move to the second case of this presentation. So let me start recalling the Wanganui saying unifying this presentation. The river flows from the mountains to the sea. I am the river is me. In this second case, I stands for the 25 plaintiffs who, representing the future generations, sue the Colombian government and other authorities because of their failure protecting the Colombian Amazonia. And this failure violated the right to enjoy a healthy environment and threatens the rights to live, to health, to food and water. To give you a general idea of the argumentation presented by the plaintiffs, I want to just share a screenshot of my reconstruction of that argumentation. So as you can notice, this is a complex argumentation with multiple levels and chains of justification. And obviously, given the limited time that we have for this presentation, I'm not going to reconstruct all the details of the argumentation, but instead, I am going to focus on the main arguments advanced by the plaintiffs in this case. So basically, they defended their claim with two main arguments. First, they justified that the right to enjoy a healthy environment was violated by the omission and not compliance of the Colombian government and authorities to protect the Colombian Amazonia. And second, they showed that that violation threatens the future generations' fundamental rights to live, to health, to food, and to water. Before spelling out the most important premises of these arguments, let us see why the plaintiffs claim to be the future generation, which is a important claim in this case and in most of these kind of environmental litigation cases. So this is the argument justifying that the plaintiffs are the future generation. So from their perspective, a generation is a group of people who, given their simultaneous historic experiences, share in some degree a worldview, a historic conscience, and a collective identity that is externalized in attitudes and behaviors. This common ground comes from the fact that the plaintiffs are the generation that will face the greatest climate change-related impacts. And unlike the present generation, the plaintiffs don't have the power to make decisions that effectively reduce greenhouse gas emissions and the rate of deforestation in the Colombian Amazonia. So they have a common ground, number one, and number two, they don't have any decision making to minimize deforestation and climate change. Given that this is an argumentum ad hominem, let me introduce you with the plaintiffs, which is an important part of this argumentation. So they are boys, girls, teenagers, and young adults who are between 7 and 26 years old. This means that they have an average life expectancy of 78 years, and they will develop most of their adult lives between 2041 and 2070, and part of their old age after that time. Climate change will take a toll on them because according to the predictions of the Colombian Institute of Hydrology, Meteorology, and Environmental Studies, which is this expert opinion was important because this was one of the first cases in the world in which a court used predictions on climate change to grant rights. So according to this Institute of Hydrology, Meteorology, and Environmental Studies, between 2041 and 2070, the annual temperature of Colombia is expected to gradually increase by 1.6 centigrades. After this period, the average annual temperature could gradually increase by 2.14. Additionally, the 17 cities and municipalities where their plaintiffs live are highly vulnerable to climate change. And then that proves that They are not only the future generation, but they not only have a common ground, but also the climate change is going to affect them considerably. Moving on to the reasons for which the plaintiffs contended that the right to enjoy a healthy environment is violated by the omissions and non-compliance of the Colombian government and authorities to protect the Colombian Amazonia. They remind us that the Colombian government agreed under the Paris Agreement and the National Development Plan, the Colombian National Development Plan 2014 and 2018 to reach zero net deforestation in the Colombian Amazon by the year 2020. That didn't happen. And to reduce its greenhouse emissions by 20% regarding the protection of emissions for 2030. However, according to satellite data gathered by the Colombian Institute of Hydrology, Meteorology, and Environmental Studies, again, during the first semester of 2017, the Colombian Amazonia was the biggest amount of area where the tropical forest disappeared. That was around 66.2% of the total of the country. The reason behind this trend, according to the plaintiffs, is that areas previously of difficult access, especially because the armed conflict, are now being colonized without the control of the Colombian government. The consequence of this omission is the negative environmental consequences that deforestation brings to the Amazonia. Even though the plaintiffs provided multiple reasons showing those destructive consequences, I am not going to reconstruct those arguments because I don't think, neither in the case not us, doubt that deforestation is corrosive for tropical forests. So let me move on to the next argument. To prove that the omissions and not compliance of the Colombian government and authorities to protect the Colombian Amazonia threatens the future generations' fundamental rights to live, to health, to food, and to water, the plaintiffs not only show how the rise of greenhouse gas emissions as a result of deforestation is fueling climate change, threatening each of those rights, but they also illustrate those ways, they also illustrate the ways in which those threats materialize in each of them individually considered. So that also shows that this was an argument and ad hominem, because they not only show how climate change is fueled by the deforestation, but also that climate change affect them or will affect them individually, which makes them the stand in the court. To illustrate this argumentative strategy, I will only use one of the fundamental rights that were protected in the case, which is the right to live. The Colombian Constitution, for the Colombian Constitution, this right has two dimensions, namely biological life, which is mere existence, and dignified life, which is the possibilities of developing a life plan, the ability of the availability of minimal conditions of existence, and the protection of physical and moral integrity. According to the future generations, the rise of greenhouse emissions as a result of deforestation threatens both dimensions. On one hand, it threatens biological life because climate change is related to the occurrence of extreme climate events such as extremely high temperatures, the increasing of rainfall, droughts, the destruction of ecosystems, the diminishing of food supplies, the spreading of diseases, and so on. On the other hand, climate change threatens the planet's possibilities of developing a life plan because this possibility depends on the effect of climate change on the temperature and the precipitation of places where the planets live. These arguments were accepted by the Supreme Court, Actually, the Supreme Court agreed with the plaintiffs, and its ruling was evaluated as one of the strongest environmental decisions ever issued by any court in the world. For this court, the fundamental rights to live, to health, to food, and to water are substantially bound to the environment, because without a healthy environment, human beings cannot survive. The increasing deterioration of the environment is a serious attack on current and future generations' life and other fundamental rights. It gradually depletes life and all its related rights. This is the main motivation for the court to protect the environmental rights of future generations. Now, for the court, the protection of future generations takes the form of specific limitations to present generations and impose on them obligations regarding to the preservation of the environment. Given that the plaintiffs justified that the omission and non-compliance of the Colombian government and authorities to protect the Colombian Amazonia threatens the future generations' fundamental rights, these restrictions and obligations were materialized by attributing the rights of protection, conservation, maintenance, and restoration to the Colombian Amazonia. So let me conclude recalling the main claim of this presentation. For Latin American jurisprudence, right attributions to rivers are not only justified by biocultural rights, but also by the rights of children and future generations. In New Zealand and India, which are the two antecedents of these decisions, the protection of rivers is a protection of the cultures depending on them. That is, right adjudications to rivers are justified by biocultural rights. In New Zealand, the Wanganui River was legally protected because of the Wanganui tribes believe that the river from which they take their name is sacred, given that it provides them a means of transportation, communication, and subsistence. In India, the Ganga and Jamuna rivers are conceived by the High Court as living entities, substantiating them more than a half of the Indian population for the mountains to the sea. In Colombia, the Constitutional Court attributed rights to the Atrato River because it provides a means of living and cultural interaction for Afro-Colombian and indigenous communities whose traditional fishing, agriculture, and mining techniques are inconceivable without the river. If these rivers disappear, the communities dependent on them also disappear. The main idea here is that rivers themselves are a necessary condition for the cultural existence of these specific communities. Even though the aforementioned decisions were not a precedent for the Colombian Constitutional Court, this tribunal, inspired by them, also attributed rights to the Colombian Amazonia. But unlike those cases, as I showed in this presentation, the protection of rivers for this court is a necessary condition for human survival. And with that, I finish my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor Marrero. That was a wonderful presentation, but it's really a remarkable argument, and it's great to see the initiative of the younger generation speaking out, saying, you know, we are the future generations. We are going to be here to experience the impacts of any harm to the climate, harm to the river, and be able to say that in the court and showing how they are the future. That's so meaningful, so true. I really appreciate your sharing their argument with us. And Okay, we have a question here. Are other rivers in Colombia involved in this decision, such as Rio Magdalena, etc.?
Yes. These are the two antecedent or present, and then the environmental protection started growing in Colombia. They are not only trying to protect with this strategy more rivers, but also these natural areas they call paramos, which is the top of the Andes mountains. And that will be a big problem for the consistency of the rights. You know, when rights expand too much, then they are ineffective and they collide to other rights. So I'm sure that will be the topic of not only philosophers but also legal scholars to see when it's enough and when you have to stop the attribution. But yeah, there are more. There at this moment there are multiple rivers that are granted with rights. But these two, so the inspiration, the legal precedent, and the ruling that all of them are following are these two cases. So that's why I only talk about these two cases. It's actually four: New Zealand, India, and the two cases from Colombia. And then there is a big explosion that I started the presentation talking about that. But these four are the inspiration for the next decisions of attributing rights to nature.
Okay. Wow. Okay. Suddenly the chat is going so fast that it's hard for me too. Oh, great. Okay. So we've got a few questions here. And the first question is whether Professor Marrero can see these rights claims for rivers might endanger the idea of rights entirely, since they depend on an absolute identification of what exactly is to be protected. For example, my right to due process is absolute to me, not like a community, etc. Do you understand that question? Should I ask?
Can you? I think so, but can you repeat it? Read it again.
Or I don't know if the speaker would like to explain it better himself. And if so, I would have to ask him to unmute once I find him in the list. Where did he go? Okay. Would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, sure. So thanks for your talk, Professor Marrero. So it's Dave Baxter. My question is, so we can't define what a river is exactly, right? And we're not trying to make like a vagueness claim here, but presumably this can be expanded to any other kind of living system and so on. And so my question is, isn't foundational to rights the very fact that it comes from this liberal idea of right, like the self or something like this, because my right to due process or whatever is absolute. Once we start expanding the idea of rights, then we can talk about like the living system of a community or something like this. And then, well, maybe my right to due process is overridden by the right of the community and so on. We get ourselves into various problems. So, you know, I'm not necessarily, this is a potential problem perhaps with, you know, applying classic liberal rights to big living systems, rivers, forests, and so on. What? How can we get around that, perhaps?
Well, I won't accept the premise that rights are absolute, which, yes, is a modern idea of rights, but I think there is few courts in the world, constitutional courts or courts defending that nowadays rights are absolute. There's always a point in which we have to do trade-offs.
Well, I'm not talking about the fire in a crowded theater example or whatever, right? But if you're saying that courts are starting to recognize that there's like limits to free speech based on religious sensibility or something like this, well, then that's not, those people aren't talking about rights at all. They're talking about something else entirely. But I'm pretty sure that's not what you have in mind, right?
No, but what I have in mind is, yeah, rights. I think rights are not absolute, and so I think that what is interesting of these right attributions is that now we have to, what they are trying to do is to put rights or nature in the trade-offs of rights, and then we will have to start limiting or expanding the rights that we are going to privilege depending of the goals of society and the values that we want to achieve.
I understand, but why then don't we just abandon rights entirely and be utilitarians, right? I mean, the river can be a moral patient. I have no problem with that. But once you start giving it rights, it looks like it undermines them. Why don't we just abandon the whole liberal idea of rights and just adopt utilitarianism and say, okay, yeah, the river is a moral patient?
Well, that's another question, isn't it?
Yes. I'm sorry. Okay, that's enough for me.
No, it's fine. It's fine. I just think rights. So there is this dimension of the law, which is the symbolic force of the law, and when we attribute rights, we are recognizing the importance of individuals or entities in this case. And I think part of the strategy of attributions of rights to nature in general is to recognize the importance of nature. So what we are doing is not only changing the concept of rights, but changing our worldview. And that would be a reason for which I won't abandon the idea of rights for nature, because we are recognizing how important it is.
I see. Thank you very much.
Sure. Yeah, and the debate of utilitarianism and the rights as yeah. Anyways, it's another debate.
Okay, we have a comment here. I'm wondering if Gloria, would you like to make your own comment, or would you like me to read what you've posted? Okay, maybe I will read it. I'm asking you to, okay, I'll read her comment. She says, I appreciate the way that the presentation connects the various issues of health, economics, culture, etc., the rights of current and future generations. So the approach should be a both and, from the rights of the river and the rights of all species and the humans who depend on a healthy place. So much of our immigration now is so connected with climate change and the exhaustion of the land and other natural resources. I am not sure if there is a question here, she said. Okay.
Well, I can comment on the comment, which is, so part of the motivation of this movement is try to think systemically, in the sense of not dividing nature and human beings, but integrating both. So they try to fight with the idea of anthropocentrism and we the center of the universe, so we being the center of the universe, we human beings. And that implies a more complex way of thinking and interrelating issues, as the list in the comment. So yeah, yeah, I don't.
Okay, thank you. We have another question. Could this help protect the Pacific coast? Thinking of Buenaventura.
Say it again.
It's probably my bad pronunciation.
No, it's fine. It's just the sound.
Could this help protect the Pacific coast? Thinking of Buenaventura.
I mean, there are no cases there yet, so maybe. I think it is. I think the movement of the rights of nature, and this is an argument against rights, accompanied by the right institutions will provide protection to nature. Yes. So if depending on the area or the areas we want to limit and protect, I think it will help, as long as the right institutions are accompanying the right attributions.
Okay, thank you. And by the way, some people are wondering where they are going to find the recording. So I can just let you know that if you ever go to the CLASA website, we have already there a link to our YouTube channel where you can see quite a few of our past events. We actually only started posting them like since the pandemic because we had so many Zoom webinars, but that's where you'll be able to go. Well, let me ask you a question because you've been talking about this saying, I am the river and the river is me. And I suppose you could say it's figuratively or symbolically speaking, or is it more than that? And if it's more than that, is it biologically speaking? Like if I take biology seriously, I am the river and the river is me? Or is there a spiritual dimension? Oh, what have you noticed when people say that? What do you think they're trying to communicate about the relationship to the river?
So I think this obviously this is my interpretation, but I think they are trying to communicate. So in New Zealand, they are trying to communicate the cultural relation to the river, their cultural relation to the river, and the dependency on their identity and the river. So it's not a biological connection, but it is a cultural connection. Now, human beings, we have this thing that we call culture, and I don't think we can live without it. So that is the inspiration for then the Colombian Supreme Court to say, then is not only a cultural connection, but a environmental connection and a condition for survival. And I think this worldview, as I was saying before, is a way of rethinking anthropocentrism and the way in which we exploit nature, and thinking of the dependencies and the ways we cannot think ourselves without thinking of parts of nature. So it's not biological, but it's ecological, I guess.
Okay, thanks a lot. We have a question now from Professor John Uko. Please share your question.
Okay, my question concerns the basis of the rights of rivers. Is it based on the fact that the river has some interests, and so they have rights based on some of the interests of their own? That is the river's own interest. Or is the basis of the rights of rivers is that rivers are connected to the people. So I am the river and the river is me. So people you said, living around the river cannot exist without the river. So the river have rights because people have a right to existence and all that. So it is on that basis that the river also has a right. So if you could please clarify that.
Yeah, I don't think in the dichotomy between it's only the interest of the river or it's only the interest of human being. I think we at this point we are interconnected. So I think the inspiration or the foundation of this kind of movements is to try to think of nature and us in a different way, not as a dichotomy. So it's not only because of human protection, and it's not only because of the interest of the river, but it's because of the ecosystems in which we interact. Yeah, I don't know if that responds to the question, but yeah, the foundation is not only the protection of the river, but it's not only the protection, the interest of human beings, but I think both in interaction.
Okay, so the river, humans and nature form like one organic whole that's connected, like deep ecology, and so therefore, if one suffers, the other one suffers. So it is more like ecocentric, or and so the rivers has rights because, I don't know, because of that connection. So I don't know, the whole nature, the whole organic thing has rights, and river is part of it, and so river has rights. So
yeah, and that's a way of protection. Yeah, so it's recognizing that we mess with nature and we intervene and we change natural patterns, and if we keep doing that, well, we know the consequences. So I think this movement is trying to recognize how much we alter nature, and is trying to protect or to put limits in those alterations and interactions.
oh, okay, all right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Please post your questions if you have them. In the meantime, I hope you don't mind if I ask you reflect on why you think this argument succeeded in Colombia at this time, because you mentioned in other places in the world, New Zealand, etc., there were successes that used part of this argument. So part of my question is how there became a movement to put forward this case, and if you have any reflections on how the case ended up being successful, because you could imagine places where a case like this would be put forward and it would be, the court would not agree. So do you have any reflections on how it was able to succeed in Colombia?
So the case is just the new environmental jurisprudence, where there are a lot of people trying to take the rights of nature and to protect nature through courts, and this is a big phenomenon in contemporary jurisprudence. Even in the U.S., maybe the most famous case is Juliana versus the U.S., which is a case where future generations, also kids, are. This started with the Obama administration. They are taking the U.S. to court, and this is a case in which it hasn't been that successful. Mexico has a couple of cases too. I think Iran has future generations fighting too. So there are multiple. This new movement of protecting nature through courts. In Colombia, why was it successful? That's a good. This is a really weak argument, and it's relying in anecdotes, but it has to do with the judges deciding the case. So the judge deciding the Atrato River case was a philosopher, smart, critical thinker, well-known, but he's a judge too. And then, well, he was reasonable. And then that was the inspiration for the next decision. So, but here in America, you know that judges not only apply the law, they can interpret the law. And I think at least for the success, I will attribute it to, in part to that. And the other is, which is part of my larger research, which is Latin America is changing constitutions and laws, and in this new ecological constitutional movement trying to protect nature. And again, because of the symbolic force of law, judges and people are starting recognizing that we should have limits to our actions and our rights regarding to the ways in which we interact with nature. So I think, yeah, I cannot attribute it to one factor, but I think the fact that at least the first judge was smart and whatever, but that's a dominant argument or fallacy if you want to. And the other one is all the ecological, they call the ecological revolution in Latin American constitutional law, is putting a lot of rights and protection of nature in the speech, in the public speech of people. So we are recognizing all these values everywhere. And these movements have limitations and not all of them are successful, and we know all that, but it's in the public speech, for good or for bad. Obviously, there are objections too.
Thank you so much. And we're about to end. I just want to make sure whether there might be any other question, especially so many students are here with us. Maybe one of you wants to ask a question. This is your big chance. Or any other attendees? After all, some of the students, you may be like these future generations. You'll be impacted by climate change. And I mean, we all will, but especially the youth will be impacted. All right. In the meantime, Laura, did you want to share with people your announcement about International Education Week, a talk tomorrow that may be related or follow up to our discussion this evening?
Yes, thank you so much, Gail. I wanted to remind all and invite folks to a special presentation by Sister Erin McDonald that will be held tomorrow afternoon at University of Detroit Mercy at 12:45 during the lunch hour. Please join us if you can. She will give a talk about her visits to the Mexican border, and we'll talk about immigration, accompaniment, and advocacy. And we'll also have some special guests talk about their experiences at the border as well. So we do invite you to the engineering building, room 220, if you are able to make it to campus for this event, and you are from the community and not necessarily from the university, please feel free to join us as well. Let the security guard know that you are there for this special talk in the engineering building, room 220. Thank you so much, Gail. And thank you, Danny, as well. I just wanted to say, I'm not a philosopher. I teach in the discipline called community development. And so much of what you're talking about in terms of the rights of rivers reminds me of a conversation that we've had with students and faculty about land. and development. And there's so much involved in development. And it reminds me of how developers often will, and the cities and municipalities look at the benefits of economics with regard to development without necessarily considering necessarily the residents and the inputs of residents of being intrinsically important. And sometimes a building doesn't always need to be built. Sometimes the land can facilitate and bring communities together in spaces. And so we are looking at different ways to do community development versus, just focusing on community development. We're also looking at the built as well as natural environment and the advocacy of the land. And certainly that does impact communities, whether we leave the land to be land itself for the sake of being land. It has an impact, can have a positive impact on communities versus trying always to develop land. So those are just some of the conversations that we're having in that program as well. A lot of what you mentioned today about the rights of rivers just reminded me of some of the projects that really impact our communities that are most vulnerable. The bridge project, for example, in the city of Detroit is having an impact environmentally on communities and the residents in these communities that really had no input on where the bridge would be built. And so bringing all of these things within the ecosystem together is really important. So although I'm not a philosopher, and some of the questions that folks posed challenged me to think differently, I really appreciate the perspectives that you bring tonight regarding the rights attributes of rivers and those case studies. So thank you so much, Danny, as well. And thank you, Gail, for bringing another excellent guest speaker.
Okay, thank you so much, Laura, and thank you again for your talk, Professor Marrero. We really appreciate it, and I look forward, when it's in print, we'll get to see all the fine details of that argument beyond what you were even able to present with us tonight.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw just now that some of the slides were blurry, but whatever. Too late. I was not reading the chat when it happened, but yeah, thank you for having me, and thank you for the questions, and thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, and thank you everyone for participating, for attending. And now we'll wish you a good evening, and we hope to see you again at future events. So thank you all very much. And good night. Thank you. Bye.